and welcome to Talkin' Sunday Readings. My name is Ann Carter. I am here as always with Pastor Richard Stadler and with Tim Carter, and we are talking about the readings that have been assigned for the Transfiguration Sunday. We are looking at an Old Testament lesson from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. Also, various passages in 2 Corinthians 3 and 4. And then the gospel for this Sunday is from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. I have a few comments I'm going to make, and then we'll turn it to Tim and see if he's got any questions. But the comments that I have about the Old Testament lesson.
A reading from 2 Kings. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry land. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two.
This was a time, this lesson is about Elijah going in the fiery chariot to heaven. It's a kind of a travelogue. It's a journey of the master and his I want to say Padawan, but that's probably not right. For those of you who are Star Wars, know that the prophet has an assistant prophet that he has been training. Elijah is leaving and Elisha is going to take his place, and the two of them spend however much time it takes to get to the place where Elijah knows he's going to be taken. Elisha knows he's going to be taken, and then this incredible miracle occurs. Their comments that I have are, I guess, twofold. One is Elisha keeps following Elijah, and Elijah says, "Don't do it." Similarly, Naomi told Ruth not to follow her either, and Ruth did. Ruth was a support. She was a confidant. She was a helper to Naomi, and it just seems to me a lesson in friendship, maybe, and loyalty, that there are these examples in the Bible of people helping each other in trying circumstances. The second, and then I'll turn it over for an answer to this question, Dick, because I think you would probably know it. This takes place after King Ahab is dead. We have a divided kingdom in Israel. Judea in the south worships Yahweh. Israel in the north is worshiping Baal and all these nasty gods. But they're a company of prophets. We see two of them that I think are in Israel. They're in Bethel. And then we got another company of prophets that were in Jericho. Really? I didn't know there were schools that you could become you were taught how to be a prophet. And that's always interested me. Who were these guys? What were they doing? And I turn it over to you.
Well, the one group's names were Samuel. No, just kidding. I don't know a whole lot about those groups either, because there's just nothing in the text that tells.
Okay.
But apparently we can infer from that there were groups of prophets who learned from the senior prophets. That's inferring a lot, I realize, because the text doesn't tell us that. And that they had some kind of an association with Elijah, because they keep coming to Elisha and telling him the same aggravating truth that, your mentor is going to be leaving you today. And 3 times at least he says, be quiet. And just another way of saying shut up. Okay, but I think maybe Middle Eastern conversation can help us understand what's going on here. When you go to the Middle East, a lot of times they'll say things like, you're looking at a melon and you say, boy, that's really nice. So take it. They don't mean take it for free. That means that's the start of the bargaining process. And so when Elijah kept saying to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel, the next place, he's giving his protege, his mentee, the opportunity to really demonstrate that he is a loyal disciple. And he says, I will not leave you. And then he throws the same phrase at Elisha again, and he says, I will not leave you, when he says, I've got to go to Jericho. And so that may be what's involved here, that there's a Middle Eastern dialogue going on here in which teacher is giving student a chance to kind of demonstrate what he's learned. And the task of a disciple of a prophet or a rabbi was to copy the life of the rabbi or the prophet, and because he's the embodiment of God. And so you walk like the rabbi, you talk like the rabbi, you sleep like the rabbi, you do everything the rabbi does. And maybe this is telling us that that's how devoted Elisha was to. He saw himself more than just as a student. He saw himself like an adopted son. And that's really what we can learn from Jewish history was the goal here. Yeah. I don't know if that helps any, but
yeah, it does. I wondered if it was a chance for Elisha to back out, because
certainly that opportunity was there, right? But it gave him another opportunity to affirm who he was, and to really cement it. Yeah. Does that raise any questions for you, Tim? The person in the view is going to wonder about.
Yeah, the layman's perspective here. I've got a couple of questions about it. One is they go to all these different places, and I'm kind of curious as to where all these places are in relation to each other. How long would it have taken them to get there? Because each group of prophets they talk to say, this day Elijah's is going to be taken up. So unless all of this happened on the same day, all these groups of prophets are wrong, aren't they? Or is this day more of a rhetorical kind of device, and they didn't literally mean today he's going to go? And then my other big question is, toward the end, Elijah says, what can I give you? What can I do for you? And Elijah asks him for, Elijah's spirit, basically. And I think it's odd that he asks Elijah for that, because wouldn't that be up to God? Wouldn't God be the one who'd be giving out spirit? That just has always struck me as kind of odd, that why does he ask Elijah for that? and is that within Elijah's power to give him? It's always struck me as odd. So if there's any insight you have to offer about either of those points, we'd love to hear it.
Well, to your first one, let's take a look at a map, because that'll maybe help if I can share the screen real quickly here. A lot of stuff happens in this same approximate location. Not far from here, down here it was Mount Nebo on this side of the Dead Sea, and that's where Moses died and was buried. Okay, this is where he hands over the leadership of the children of Israel to Joshua. And also Jericho is right close to where they are, and there. And so that's where Joshua takes the children of Israel and crosses the Jordan River as they go into their new promised land. This is also, of course, the place where Jesus was baptized, at Bethany across the Jordan. So this is a place that is full of meaning for Jews who know their history, and a lot of Jews would know their history because they handed it down orally to each other. And so this is the approximate place where Elijah takes Elisha across the river, and he does something that would remind them of Joshua too. When Joshua had the priests enter the rivers of the Jordan, their feet got into the water and the river separated so they could go over on dry land. And here he hits the water with his mantle and it separates. And so the language is very parallel to the crossing of the children of Israel into the promised land. And so he's going out. And what's interesting is that I used to think that he went up to heaven in a fiery chariot, but when you look closely at the text, it's like bookends at both the beginning of the story that we're going to hear read, and at the end it says in a whirlwind. The fiery chariot and the fiery horses separated Elijah from Elisha, but it says very specifically he goes up in a whirlwind. And so
interesting.
And this it really fits Transfiguration Sunday, which we're observing this Sunday, because Elijah and Moses both appear to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they're both leaving this world, so to speak, in a very close proximity to each other from Mount Nebo and this location. So there's just a lot of neat parallels that are going on here. Anne, do you have any other thoughts on that, on the location? And
No, not really. I know that there's one theory or belief that neither Moses nor Elijah died and they were just out in the wilderness, and then they were still alive when Jesus was on Mount Transfiguration. That's why,
that theory has a problem with the text of Scripture, because the Scripture says that Moses died and God buried him.
Yeah.
Nobody knew where the burial place was, so they couldn't go back and commit idolatry there. However, to your other question, and that is, what about this giving of a double portion?
Yeah.
Can you remember from your knowledge of Old Testament history who got a double portion?
Joseph's sons.
The oldest son in the family always got a double portion of the inheritance, so that he could take care of his mom, he could take care of his sisters who did not get a portion, and everybody else got one section. So if he gets a double portion, is he implying that he considers himself Elijah's firstborn? And when he says, I want a double portion of your spirit, it's a way of saying, all that you are, if I'm going to follow you, I'm going to need it and in double, and Elijah doesn't seem to be offended by that, and he doesn't think that it's irregular for him to ask Elijah rather than God directly, because Elijah is God's man, he's God's spokesman, he's God's prophet, he's speaking for God, and so it'd be natural to go to him and expect some kind of an answer. And he says to him, you'll be assured that you get it if you see me go. And that's exactly what he does. And he says the chariots and the horses of the Lord as Elijah disappears in the heavens. And so there's just a tight connection of a promise and promise kept in this verse. Yeah. And then, which is not in the reading, is when he goes back across the Jordan River after having crossed it with Elijah and watched him go up into heaven. He takes that same mantle that has apparently fallen off Elijah, and he uses it to hit the water, and the water separate for him.
Oh.
And that had to be an assurance. You got the double portion. You got the inheritance. And now you can function for God the way Elijah functioned, and Elisha does. He's a very faithful prophet.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that helps anybody.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That does help for sure.
Mhm. I like the fact in that, quickly before we go on, that Elijah didn't give it to him. Elijah knew that it had to be granted by somebody else. And Elijah makes that clear, that I'll tell you what, but it's not mine to give. I think that's what
That's interesting. Yeah.
that's how we have to live our life always. Is I can make a promise, but God's going to have to fulfill it.
Yeah.
So if we can, I don't mean just to jump over 2 Corinthians, but I would like us to talk a little bit more about transfiguration.
The Holy Gospel according to Mark. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him, and led them up a high mountain, where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them, and there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my Son whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
It says 6 days later in Mark 9. And this always bugged me as a child when we would go to church and we would hear first the stories of Jesus being born, and then we would hear some stories about what was happening. We're starting out in Mark. We're not even through chapter 1 yet, and all of a sudden we're in chapter 9. The church year is divided such that we don't take Jesus' life in a direct narrative, chronological. We jump around, and here's Transfiguration Sunday. If anybody wonders why we jumped right into Mark 9, it's for the church year. 6 days later, what happened in Mark 1 and Mark 8 is that Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then they go up on the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus is revealed to Peter, James, and John just who he is. I've seen this story many times, but this time what struck me is all of the sensory things that were going on in this story. They witnessed dazzling white. Jesus was intensely bright. And then there's this voice coming out of nowhere. And then there's these people showing up that they don't know who they are. And then there's this cloud, this overshadowing cloud, and suddenly all their perceptions are they can't see anything. And then they hear this booming voice, and then boom, everything goes away. I can only imagine that they were terrified when they had such overload of sensory, of all senses: sight, sound, hearing, feeling, taste, etc., etc. And then they come down the mountain. You go up to the mountaintop and you experience this, and then you have to come back down to earth. It's fun. It's a fun story.
What questions is this going to raise in the mind of a person sitting in the pew, Tim?
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of questions. One, it specifies that he took Peter, James, and John. I'm curious about why he took those 3 specifically. Was there something about them, or is this, again, kind of like last week where we just are just establishing the witnesses, I guess? And every time I've heard this, it seems so odd to me that he suggests what does he say? It's really good that we're here. Let us build you each a shelter, a structure. And I've always thought that's the goofiest thing he could do. I've always wondered if that's just because he's overwhelmed and he's babbling, or and then I'm wondering now, were they up there longer than I thought? Because if they're up there long enough to build a shelter, does that it's always been an odd thing, and I'm wondering if there's any insights you guys can bring about that, because it's a very strange thing that he says. Let us build you each a shelter, one for each of you. And is he talking about building a big house? Is it just a tent? What is he talking about?
Well,
And if there's anything you can give, yeah.
I think the text gives us a little bit of help, and especially some of the other texts about the transfiguration, because they say Peter just didn't know what to say. And when you don't know what to say, you resort to what comes naturally, and that is hospitality. And so obviously we're going to make a safe place for your guests, Jesus, and for you here on the mountain for as long as you decide you're going to be here. And so there was maybe his assumption they're going to be there longer than what they ended up being.
That makes sense too.
And the place that they're at is called a high mountain, and none of the gospel writers feel the need to tell people what it is. So they must have assumed that their readers knew which high mountain it was. Well, we know they're in the area of Caesarea Philippi because of other accounts of the Transfiguration that tell us about this exchange between Jesus and his disciples. And so the only high mountain there is Mount Hermon, which is right on the northern edge of Israel. I mean, that's a huge mountain. They ski on it still today. So it's a ski mountain. And so that may be another reason, depending on what time of the year. If this is spring, it may have been so cool up on the mountain. And so that's why he felt a need to make a shelter for them. But I think Anne was right that the visual of this is just really stunning, with the way Jesus looked, and it would have intimidated the bravest fisherman, and would have made him wonder what's going on here. And did we answer the question that you asked, the second question?
Yeah, my second question was mostly about, what is he talking about?
Why Peter, James, and John?
The first question.
We don't know, except that they are the inner circle. In Gethsemane, it's the three of them go in. Jairus's daughter's raising, and here. So apparently they were the inner circle, but I'm not going to say leaders, but at least the inner circle. Yeah, they were included in a lot. Yeah, in a special way.
Interesting. I do have. You mentioned that they're fishermen and they're up on this. Now I'm picturing them up on this big high mountain. Is it likely that they've ever been up on a mountain before? Just because of their lifestyle, if they're fishermen and all of a sudden they're mountain climbing.
Well, if they hiked all the way down to where Jesus was being baptized, at least Peter and Andrew did, I would guess that on the western side of the Sea of Galilee is this huge cliff called the Arbel Cliff. And I would guess that they had climbed up there more than once. So they were used to climbing. I would get, and I'm only guessing now. And so
it's all good picture. But.
And so that might explain their comfort with going up with Jesus, and why Jesus would sometimes go up into mountains and pray all night long, or get away from everybody. That it was part of the landscape that they were comfortable with. Yeah.
I've got another.
Go ahead.
I've got another question about this one. So this whole thing happens, and Jesus then instructs them not to say anything about it until after the Son of Man has risen from the dead, which seems kind of odd to me, because I'm wondering now, how much of the plan did they know? How much did he let them in on? Did he let them know? I guess, that's my question. How much did they know about the plan? How much did Jesus let them in on, and what did they know about what was going on?
I think it depends on what period of time you're talking about in his ministry. I think this is the beginning of his tutorial with them. And so he may, as an expert teacher, throw out this phrase, until the Son of Man had risen from the dead, just to raise their question about, wait a minute, when's he going to die? What's that mean? And to raise questions in the minds of his students, his disciples, so that they would engage in the learning process. He's a very skilled teacher, and I think sometimes when he throws stuff out like that, it would cause a lot of conversation, side conversation.
Yeah. And there was side conversation afterwards because the disciples said to each other, what is he talking about?
Yep.
Okay.
We don't get it in this reading, but what is he talking about? Raising from the dead? When you're dead, you're dead. You don't come back. This was, and why would he die? And what is, yeah, you don't come back once you're gone. And that he is already predicting he's going to die means that if he's a Messiah who's we're going to conquer Rome, and he's already predicting he's going to die, well, then it's kind of a failed mission, isn't it?
Mm.
It's, mhm.
Well, and when he tells them to tell no one,
Mhm.
that will change as he gets to the Great Commission, where he tells them, tell everybody, tell the whole world, but when you look at this whole event, isn't it fascinating how these readings all kind of fit together on this emphasis of the Transfiguration?
Mhm.
There was one other thing that I thought might be worth underscoring, and that is that notice that the Gospels give you the full picture, but not one Gospel gives you everything. And it's Luke's Gospel that tells us what Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about. And they were talking to him, and it uses the word in the Greek New Testament for Exodus, about his upcoming Exodus, when he would die and leave life, but he would make it back, just like Joshua led people into the promised land. So he would come back to life. And so I don't know how much of this Peter, James, and John overheard, or if this is something that the Holy Spirit inspired the gospel writers who wrote that to include that in their story. But it also tells us that the cloud that came down was totally different than the cloud that was on Mount Sinai, which was very dark and very threatening, and it had lightning and all kinds of stuff going on that scared the daylights out of the people of Israel. This cloud was a bright cloud, but it still scared them. And you can imagine why. If you got a big sky, and like Ann said, if you have a voice coming from the sky, that would really get your attention. What's the difference between this message and the message that was given from the sky at the baptism of Jesus? There he says from the sky, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well
pleased.
Period. Here he said, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And that may answer your earlier question, Tim, and that is that they were instructed by God the Father, start paying attention, guys. Listen to everything my son has to say to you, because he's going to be explaining what's going to be happening, and he's going to be laying out the plan, in his own way, in his own time.
Interesting.
So that's an interesting addition to the communication that was given at his baptism.
It's not just listen to what he's saying and his instruction. It's listen to kind of
everything.
The plan. Listen, really pay attention to what he's saying. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you all. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for watching. We are pleased, as always, to have these discussions. It brings us great insight. It's fun to study and prepare, and it's fun to chat about it. So please come back. Please come back next week. Please share this if you are so inclined. May you have a good week. Stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again on Talking Sunday Readings. Bye.